August 1944, as Allied armies clawed their way out of Normandy, German generals mocked the Americans. To them, the United States was not a land of warriors. It was a nation of businessmen and mechanics, untested in the fires of war. The Wehrmacht believed America's reliance on machines, gasoline, and endless supplies was its fatal flaw. Cut their supply lines, the Germans reasoned, and the American war machine would collapse under its own weight. But they were wrong. For when George S. Patton's tanks thundered across France, fueled not by chance, but by the relentless grind of a supply operation called the Red Ball Express, those same generals stopped laughing. Because what they had underestimated was not just America's industry, but America's ability to move. German generals laughed at U.S. logistics until the Red Ball Express fueled Patton's Blitz. World War II was more than a contest of soldiers and strategy. It was a war of movement, a war of machines, and above all, a war of supply. Every bullet fired, every tank shell launched, every mile advanced required fuel, food, and ammunition. Modern armies, no matter how courageous, could not march on empty stomachs or empty gas tanks. And no Allied commander understood this better than George S. Patton. Patton was a whirlwind of a man, brash, arrogant, brilliant. He believed in momentum, in keeping the enemy on the back foot, in striking with speed and aggression. His army was built on movement. But movement required gasoline, and in 1944, gasoline was as vital as blood. This is the story of how America turned an apparent weakness into its greatest strength. How an improvised highway of trucks, driven by young men, many of them African American, often overlooked and unrecognized, kept the Allied advance alive. This is the story of the Red Ball Express. To understand the Red Ball Express, we must go back to the beaches of Normandy. On June 6, 1944, the Allies launched the largest amphibious invasion in history, D-Day. The landings succeeded, but what followed was slow, brutal, grinding. The bocage country of Normandy, hedgerows thick as walls, fields broken by sunken lanes, turned every advance into a bloody crawl. Yet, by late July, the tide shifted. Operation Cobra shattered German defenses. American forces poured through the gap, and suddenly, the battlefield transformed. What had been a slugging match became a race. The Germans, caught off balance, reeled backward. Patton's Third Army, activated on August 1st, surged forward. In just days, his divisions advanced farther than any expected. But victory carried a hidden danger. The farther the Americans pushed, the longer their supply lines stretched. Normandy's beaches were now hundreds of miles behind. France's railroads and bridges lay in ruins. Fuel depots had yet to be built. And then there was the staggering consumption of Patton's own army. His armored divisions drank gasoline at an astonishing rate. A single Sherman tank might burn 3 gallons of fuel for every mile traveled. His army required 500,000 gallons of gasoline every single day. This was the moment German generals thought would break the Americans. Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge reportedly told his staff, "They advance like a flood, but soon the tide will run out. They cannot feed this machine." He wasn't entirely wrong. By mid-August, Patton's advance threatened to outstrip his supplies. His tanks were often down to their last gallons. Some had to be abandoned on roadsides, waiting for trucks that might never arrive. The German prediction, that America's reliance on logistics would be its undoing, seemed on the verge of coming true. The crisis demanded a solution, and fast. Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower authorized a radical plan. A non-stop convoy system of trucks, dedicated solely to moving supplies from the Normandy beaches and depots forward to the advancing front. This lifeline would be known as the Red Ball Express. The name was borrowed from U.S. railroad slang. A red ball train meant priority freight, high speed, no delays. The Army adopted the term for a road network where trucks had absolute right-of-way. Two parallel routes were carved across France, one for trucks going out, one for trucks returning. Civilian traffic was banned. Military police manned every intersection. Signs marked with a blazing red ball guided drivers through towns and fields, day and night. The lifeblood of the red ball was the GMC CCKW truck, the famous deuce and a half. Rugged, reliable, capable of carrying 2.5 tons of cargo, these trucks became the arteries of Patton's war machine. At its peak, the Red Ball Express fielded over 6,000 trucks a day. Between August and November 1944, it hauled more than 412,000 tons of supplies. But this was no easy task. The drivers faced punishing schedules, 20 hours behind the wheel, little sleep, endless convoys through mud, rain and dust. Engines overheated, tires blew out, brakes failed on mountain roads, and the work was dangerous. German planes sometimes strafed the convoys. Ambushes from desperate Wehrmacht units lurked along the routes. But the greatest enemy was exhaustion. Many drivers nodded off at the wheel, trucks veering into ditches. Yet they drove on. Who were these drivers? The unsung heroes of the Red Ball were overwhelmingly African-American soldiers. In an army still segregated by race, black troops were often relegated to support roles. Over 75% of Red Ball drivers were black. For many, this was their chance to prove themselves, to serve their country, to silence prejudice, to be part of history. One driver later recalled, "We didn't have time to think about discrimination. We were too busy driving. The tanks needed gas, and we gave it to them." And so, day and night, the convoys rolled. From Normandy depots to forward dumps near Chartres, Paris, and beyond, trucks thundered over ruined roads, headlights blacked out, engines growling through the French countryside. To the soldiers at the front, the sight of a Red Ball convoy was a blessing. A GI remembered, "When those trucks showed up, we cheered. It meant we could eat. It meant our tanks could move. It meant we were still in the fight." The German generals who had laughed at America's logistical weakness now realized the truth. The Americans had built a rolling pipeline that could not be stopped. The Red Ball Express kept Patton's Third Army alive during the most critical months of the campaign. In late August, when supplies ran dangerously low, Patton demanded every gallon be sent forward. Trucks carried jerry cans, drums, and even loose cans stacked to the ceiling. His divisions pushed through Orleans, across the Seine, and toward the German frontier. German reports spoke in disbelief of the American speed. A retreating officer wrote, "They appear everywhere at once. They have more fuel than we can imagine." But in reality, Patton was living on a knife's edge. His tanks often arrived at the front lines with their fuel gauges near empty. Sometimes trucks delivered gasoline just as the last drops drained from the engines. Still, momentum was preserved. The Germans, still reeling from the collapse in Normandy, could not reorganize fast enough. By September, Patton's forces had crossed the Moselle River and stood at the doorstep of Germany itself. The Red Ball Express had turned the impossible into reality. German generals who once laughed at American logistics now understood. They were facing not just an army, but an industrial juggernaut with wheels that never stopped turning. The Red Ball Express did not last forever. By November 1944, with ports like Antwerp secured and pipelines snaking across France, the emergency convoys were scaled back. The Red Ball Express officially ended on November 16th, but in its short existence, it had accomplished miracles. In just 81 days, it delivered enough supplies to keep an entire modern army moving at full speed. The cost had been high, trucks worn out, engines destroyed, drivers pushed to exhaustion. Hundreds of vehicles were lost to accidents. Lives were claimed by crashes, ambushes, and fatigue. Yet the mission succeeded. The Red Ball Express gave Patton the fuel he needed when he needed it most. It kept the pressure on the retreating Germans. It helped liberate Paris, drive across France, and bring the Allies to the gates of Germany. The Red Ball Express was more than just trucks and gasoline. It was proof that wars are not won by battles alone. They are won by the unseen, the unheralded, the men who labor behind the front lines. The German generals failed to grasp this truth. They laughed at American logistics because they had never faced a system so vast, so flexible, so relentless. For the young men who drove those trucks, many of them African American, it was their moment of pride. They had answered their country's call, even when their country denied them equality. Their sacrifice fueled victory. In the words of one driver, "We weren't heroes. We were just doing our job. But without us, the job couldn't have been done." History has long remembered the tanks, the generals, the battles. But the Red Ball Express reminds us that sometimes the most decisive victories are carried on the backs of ordinary soldiers doing extraordinary things. In the late summer of 1944, the Allies were in danger of outrunning their own success. German generals smirked, certain the Americans would stumble. But instead, the Red Ball Express roared to life. 6,000 trucks, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. A living artery across France. It silenced the laughter of German generals. It fueled Patton's Blitz. And it proved once and for all that logistics, unyielding, grinding, unstoppable, was the true engine of modern war. The Red Ball Express remains a testament to the invisible heroes of World War II, whose wheels carried freedom across Europe. And it remains a reminder for us today that while generals may plan battles and armies may fight them, victory belongs to those who can keep moving forward. If you found this story compelling and want more hidden histories of the Second World War, make sure to subscribe and join us as we uncover the untold stories that shaped our world.